to another episode of PDA Dad UK. In this episode I want to look at the issue of benefits and try and explain from my perspective and the story, the journey that we've taken, and hopefully destigmatize benefits to some degree. I've chosen to do this because there's been I've noticed a lot of questions coming up about it, people popping up with sort of opinions on benefits, and I was somebody who had a very similar opinion. So I've always worked from the day I left home through to when I became a full-time carer. I've worked in full-time work in the private sector, and I always had very strong opinions about benefits. Obviously these are my taxes that are going to pay these benefits, and you know, I fell for the shows like Benefit Street that give this really bad light on people who are receiving benefits, because there are people who are abusing the system, and it is so wrong. And I'm not here to justify that or qualify that or condone it in any way, shape or form. But I also want to make the point that not everybody who's in receipt of a benefit is milking the system in that way. So, as I say, I've always worked. I think there's been 3 weeks in my life where I didn't, and that was when I came from Australia over to the UK and I had to find work. I was out of work for about 3 weeks and then got a job, and that was that. And that was during the recession as well, so I was probably quite lucky in that. With my daughter, her needs really started to escalate. So once she started nursery and then school, her behaviours became a lot more challenging, and it became a lot more apparent that there was something that needed to be addressed, and that's what we had to do. So that's when the process started to get on the pathway for diagnosis and all that kind of stuff. After my daughter was born, my wife had a quite severe bout of postnatal depression, and we got through that and things trundled on. But when my son was born 5 years ago, we expected that obviously we knew there was postnatal depression historically, so it was likely that we were going to face the same situation again. We spoke to the hospital and the neonatal unit there and talked about the fact that this was a possibility, and a lot of things got put in place. My wife was in receipt of counselling, and from that it was actually diagnosed that she's bipolar. Now she wants to do an episode on that with me in the future, which we're going to do, so keep an eye open for that. From that diagnosis, it became very clear that she was not able to cope in the home environment, especially with two kids, one with challenging behaviours and special educational needs, and of course a baby. And we tried to make it work. I was working full time, but I was constantly getting pulled away from my job. So I'd get a call, something was going on behaviourally or whatever, my wife being unable to cope in that situation, and she would call me and I'd have to go and put out these sort of spot fires, if you like, and was constantly sort of fighting these battles. My boss was, bless him, really understanding, but it was obviously stressful for him too. He's running a business. I was doing everything I can. I was trying to make up the hours outside of work, working from home and all that kind of stuff, but it clearly wasn't working and something needed to be done. So at that point I actually started my own business so I could actually manage my time to work more effectively. What was happening at that stage was my wife now had a key worker, and they diagnosed her alongside the bipolar. She's also epileptic. They diagnosed her also with emotionally unstable personality disorder, which is known internationally as borderline personality disorder, if you've more likely heard of that. And the combination of all this was just really coming to a head. So she was assigned a key worker so that we could work things through, and it was basically my key worker took me aside and said, look, you guys can't go on this way. This is going to implode badly unless something's done. You actually need to become a full-time carer. And I was initially really against doing this. As I say, I've always worked, and I think for a lot of us, our work's our identity to a large degree. So I was a marketing manager. That's what I did. I ran the marketing section for the company I worked for, and I was running my own marketing business when we come to this point. And it was a bit of a punch in the face for me. I was very resistant to it. And in the end, it was just made really apparent when we looked at the situation. It wasn't working. I was letting some of my clients down because I was unable to complete work in a timely fashion. And basically the result was I had to make a decision to become a full-time carer. And it didn't sit comfortably, but sometimes the right people are put in your life at the right time. I don't know if you experienced this, but certainly in my life, sometimes the right person pops up at the right time. And I'd taken the kids out to one of the national parks in Devon, one of the National Trust sites. And we were having a run around and bumped into a family there, didn't know them, but clearly a couple of grandparents, and they had their grandkids with them. One of the grandkids was Down syndrome. And we got talking, and he, natural sort of small talk conversation, and he asked what I do. So I'd say, well, it's funny you should ask. I've recently had to pack my business in, and I am now a full-time carer for my daughter. And I explained about her autism, and I said, obviously your granddaughter there's Down syndrome, and he goes, yeah, it's what I do. And it turns out he was her carer. And he asked how I felt about it, and I obviously, this was when I was really still going through the turmoil of trying to sort this all out in my head, and felt like I'd lost my identity somewhat, and was adjusting, if we like, adjusting to my new role as a full-time carer. And it was a really good thing to say this, because he goes, well, look, I want you to understand, would you go back to work tomorrow if you could? And of course my answer was yes, in a heartbeat. I'd go back to full-time work without hesitation. And he said then, well, if you were to do that in the current situation, how much do you think it would cost the government to pay someone to come and do the work you're doing? Because it's obviously necessary to have someone there for that extra support. I hadn't thought about it. He sort of said, well, I'll tell you now, it's at least 3 times what you're getting paid right now. More likely 5 to 10 times. And then he said, you're not milking the system. And of course this was part of the turmoil in my head, was that I felt like I was just taking. He said, you're not milking the system, you're not taking from the system, you're actually saving the government tens to hundreds of thousands of pounds a year in what it would cost for this extra support to be in place by professionals to come in and do it. And then he said to me this, he said, you are a carer. You've got to start seeing your role now. Your job is as a carer. And he put me onto some people here in Devon. There's what they call the Devon carers. And he said, give them a call and go through the process of being registered as a carer and all that kind of stuff. So I did that. And it was a big switch in that moment in my head. It turned out, funnily enough, he was my old boss's father or father-in-law. And it just the irony of it wasn't lost on me at all. But it was a massive switch for me, and it was a massive transition in my head to understand that I hadn't lost my identity. I'd gained a slightly new one, a different one. I am a carer. And anyone asks me what I do now, that's what I say. I'm a full-time carer, because that's what I am. That's what my pay is for. I'm in receipt of the carer's benefit. And I dislike that it's called that. It's basically my wage. I'm being paid by the government to do the job that I do. My job starts at about 6 a.m. when my daughter gets up, if we're lucky, normally closer to 4 or 5. It ends at about 7:30, 8 o'clock when she finally crashes and settles in for the evening to go to sleep. In the meantime, I'm looking after my wife in the home. My wife's become considerably more ill. She, with the bipolar disorder, it's one of those things that's very unpredictable, and it's challenging, and she faces obstacles every day that I can't imagine. But, my job is there to support and make sure that things like medications are taken. I take care of the house, I take care of all the food shopping and making sure that we're, getting everything we need for the kids and for ourselves. And then I'm there for the school pickups and getting everybody home, getting them fed, and this isn't putting my wife down. My wife does as much as she can. It's exhausting. I don't know if you're familiar with a lot of the medications they use for bipolar, but they're mainly sedatives, and they really knock a person out. And that's what my wife has to face. So that's where I'm able to pick up the slack because I'm a paid carer. And switching that mentality and understanding that's who I am really made a difference, and it's opened up other opportunities for me to give back in ways that I wouldn't have been able to otherwise. Things like doing this channel, things like running the Facebook group I run, where we've got 22,000 odd members, all from the UK, who are struggling with the same situations and issues. It's a page for parents of autistic kids. And I also do a crossing duty at my son's school, so I go down there and do that volunteer. They're just little ways that I can give back that don't detract from the time I'm needed in the home, and I can work them around my life in that way. It's so important that we start to see ourselves that way, and it's so important that other people start to recognise that people who are on carers allowances are usually on a carers allowance because it's very, very necessary. As I say, I'm not condoning people who milk the system and are doing it for the wrong reasons, but the vast majority of people, the hoops you have to go through to get a carers allowance and to be on these benefits, if you like, are huge. And we've had to have people do home assessments. You have to go through a whole process of assessments, and you have to repeat it every couple of years in order to stay on it. So it's not something that's just given willy-nilly out by the government. It doesn't happen that way. So if you're in a situation where you're facing this stuff and you are looking to become a carer yourself, or to use the benefits that are available, and this is a really important thing, these benefits are available for a reason. They're there because they're needed and they're essential for our country to work the way it works. We live in a country that is geared towards supporting everybody and making sure that everybody has a fair chance, and I think that's to be respected. It's a good thing. Many countries don't have that, and we're very lucky that we do. But they're there for a reason. They're there because it keeps things ticking over and keeps families and the country supported and moving forward. I couldn't do a job and do what I do as a carer together. It wasn't working, and it was causing issues for my employer, it was causing issues for my business, causing issues for my clients. That can't be. So if you're looking to go on to some form of benefit, if you're looking towards a carer's allowance or whatever, the best advice I can give is to head to your local Citizens Advice Bureau. I did this. The reason they're so good with this is because they're on your side, and what they'll do is actually sit down and work out what entitlements you have, what you're eligible for. They also have a service where they help you complete the forms and get them lodged, and it's really good because they know how to phrase things. So there are certain key words that they know to put in, and they do it very honestly and very fairly. There's an old myth, if you like, I think it used to be true, but it's not now, is that you always put down your worst day, and that's just not the case anymore. In fact, you can be done for being fraudulent if that's the case, if you're discovered. The whole point is that they go through, they assess it properly, and then they know the keywords and the right phrases to put into the documentation so that you have the best chance of a successful application. And it's a fantastic service. It means it probably takes a little longer, but the benefits of the other side for yourself are huge. So I really recommend going to the Citizens Advice Bureau. There's loads of information online as well. Cerebra.org.uk have a fantastic how-to sheet, if you like, that goes through each section of the carers forms and the DLA forms to lodge for those. DLA is another one that's really important, and again, it's one of those things that's probably a little misunderstood. If you're a parent of a SEN child or an autistic child or a child with disabilities, you'll understand, and many people don't, is that everything goes up in price. There are certain toys and certain things that are just necessary to have when you've got autistic kids, from my perspective, sensory areas. So my daughter is SPD as well, sensory processing disorder. You can tell she struggles with clothing, she struggles with her environment around her. She feels everything. So when we get new clothes, it's always a nightmare, because if there's a seam in the wrong place, If there's a label that sticks out in the wrong way, if there's something that just doesn't fit quite right or feel quite right, you can expect a meltdown, and you can expect that that's never going to get worn again. So then you can look at things like sensory clothing. So Marks and Spencer's do a fantastic line of sensory school uniforms specifically for autistic kids. They cost about 3 times as much as your standard uniform. Now, I'm not criticising Marks and Spencer for that, but basically you add the word sensory or autism or disability to anything, you can expect the price to go up dramatically. The only way we can afford to do the things that we need to do for our kids is by claiming things like DLA, because they help us to pay for those extra and important things that are so necessary. There are lots of charities around as well. So groups like Family Fund, where they do provide grants for things that you might need an extra hand with. So if you're looking for a trampoline because your kid likes that, so we've got a trampoline and it's a godsend for my daughter if she's really stressed or upset, and you can see her go out on the trampoline, have a bounce around, let it all out. It does wonders. And if you can't afford to get one yourself in that situation, there are these grants available from groups like Family Fund. And again, groups like Citizens Advice Bureau, they will be able to help you with finding grants that are available if they're needed. And again, there's an application process. These things aren't just handed out on a whim. They assess each situation, so be prepared for that. But it means that people hopefully aren't cheating the system as well. And that's the point I want to get across. If you're cheating the system, you're doing wrong. You're hurting other people, you're hurting the country, you're hurting yourselves ultimately, I believe. If you're in need of these benefits, if you're in need of these allowances and these grants, then they're there for a reason. They're not there because somebody just decided, well, let's give some money away. It was actually that there was a need identified and these things have been put in place. Please don't judge people who are on these kind of benefits, because I guarantee you they're dealing with a whole lot more than you realise. When I moved from being a full-time private sector worker to being a full-time carer, my pay dropped dramatically. These things are necessary. We wouldn't be able to survive as a family without it. Goodness knows what would happen, but we couldn't have been able to cope with my daughter the way that she is. That's not a criticism of my daughter, she's wonderful, but she has these behaviours and related conditions to her autism that mean that she just needs that extra support. If she was to go into care, which would be the only other option we'd have, we'd be looking at £1,800 a week for a room, and that's the truth. People who are on carers doing a full-time carer's job are actually saving the system money. They're not costing the system money. They are working for the government, if you like. I am an employee of the government as a full-time carer. I'd love to hear your stories. If you've had to claim benefits or claim carers or allowances for any reason, please let me know. What were they for? How did it go? What opposition have you met? If you've got people who are butting heads with you and have this opinion, how do we change that? I'd love your opinions in the comments. Please do like and subscribe to my channel. It does get the word around, and it just means that people who need to hear these videos gets in their ears. So please click subscribe, click that little bell button, and you'll always be notified of when I've got a new video up. Have a great week, and I will see you next time.